Good afternoon, friends. I'm deeply honoured to stand before you all today as the Labour Party's candidate in the Midlands North West constituency. As we all know, this is a new constituency and I am a new candidate, and I'm standing in this constituency to win. And I want to tell you just a little bit about me and who I am and about the journey I've taken to stand before you here today in Mullingar. This journey began approximately 5 years ago. At the time, as we can all recall, the economic downturn and deep recession was taking hold. Thousands of jobs were being lost every month. People, especially those from my generation, were leaving our shores to find brighter futures elsewhere, away from their families and their loved ones. And I have to say, I was angry. I was very angry about what was happening then. And I wanted to do something about it. And as a young woman in my 20s, I just couldn't stand by and do nothing. I knew I had to make a contribution and speak up on behalf of my generation and for the future of this great country. I had just, at that time, returned back from Dublin, back to Athenry, my hometown, after 7 years working and practicing as a barrister. And I was really shocked to see what was happening in Athenry at that time. It had been a thriving community, very, very confident community, and over the previous 20 years, a part of the country which had suffered the scourge of emigration, but it was transformed into an area of hope and optimism and growth. Local people had local jobs. Young people were able to stay in their local community, to live, to work, and to raise a family. They were able to enjoy the pace of life in the place that they were born. But in 2008 and 2009, almost overnight, all of that was changed. Hopelessness, despair, fear, all returned with a vengeance. But at that time, a good friend of mine had decided to run for election, for the local elections. That was in 2009, and I agreed back then to be his campaign manager. And together, we spoke to people right across the community and heard all of their concerns and felt their despair. 3 weeks from the election, unfortunately, that friend of mine had to withdraw from the race. And I was just thinking of all the positive work that we had done over the previous weeks, and I knew there and then that I had to put my name forward for election. I went home, I remember that night, and I told my parents. They thought I was mad. The next morning I woke up and I thought I was mad. But I stuck to my decision. I knew that having met so many people, having heard their stories, and having known how badly they'd been let down by the previous generation of elected representatives and politicians, that I had to make my voice heard. I may not have been elected in 2009, but there's no doubt about it, the political bug bit me hard. I loved meeting people. I loved campaigning. And I had ideas about what needed to be done to improve my local community. And I just knew that I had to continue to try and make a difference. I met with the Labour Party back then, and I met with Eamon Gilmore. I'd always admired him, not just because he was from County Galway, but I had also admired the work that he and all of his colleagues, to include Joan Burton, how they'd articulated the worries and concerns of ordinary people at a time of absolute economic chaos. I joined the Labour Party soon after, and after narrowly missing out on a seat in the general election, I was honoured to have been nominated to the Seanad in 2011. And since my nomination to the Seanad, I've been driven by the same energy which convinced me to get involved in politics in the first place. My approach to politics is very simple. If you have ideas, if you want to represent the people, and if you want to make a difference, then get involved. And so, I stand here today as our candidate for the European Parliament, and I'm sure many of you ask the question, why Europe? What do I want to do there? And how do I think I can win? And I've asked those questions of myself, friends, but I want to tell you my answers to each and every one of them. The answer to the why Europe question is very simple. I think that our membership of the European Union is a force for our good. Over the decades, the European Union has become increasingly important to our day-to-day lives. We've only seen that particularly over the last number of years. But it has helped us trade. It has helped benefit local businesses as well. It has brought us jobs and investment in this part of the country. It has helped to influence important social changes for everyone, for men and women, young and old, rich and poor, gay and straight. But we often take our EU membership for granted. But we in the Labour Party make no apology for saying that in many aspects we do have an imperfect European Union. But it's just when I see in recent days where people are dying on the streets of the Ukraine because they believe in closer cooperation with the European Union that it demonstrates to me how Europe is a guarantor of freedom and democracy, and that our membership of the Union should be cherished. This is something that those in Sinn Féin, the Socialist Party, and anti-Europeans talk so flippantly about, when they'd be better off to bear this in mind. Secondly, friends, my priorities in the European Parliament will be to represent the large and small towns of the Midlands Northwest, to continue the good work that has been done in tackling youth unemployment, and to continue to press for a deal on Ireland's legacy bank debt issue. And ours is a constituency of many towns, and the impact of the recession, it has to be said, has been felt in many different ways right across the different parts of this country. The experience of Kells and Castlebar, Portumna, Portarlington is not necessarily the same as the experience of that of Dublin, Limerick and Cork. And I feel we have to make sure that as this country begins to recover, that the benefits are not just confined to these large urban areas. We need to make sure that the recovery is evenly spread throughout this constituency and throughout this country. And I see myself as a voice for those towns and to make sure that their interests are well represented in the European Parliament. There's no doubt about it, and I see many of my own generation here in this room. We have borne the brunt of unemployment and emigration, and in particular, this part of the country has borne the brunt of it. And youth unemployment is one of the most worrying developments in Ireland in recent times. And I have to say, I'm very, very proud as a Labour Party public representative that we are tackling this issue head on by introducing the Youth Guarantee. And I'd like to commend my colleague, MEP Emer Costello, for all her hard work in this initiative. And I'd like a bula bust to her for those efforts. But like MEP Costello, I also want to ensure that the young people across the 15 counties of this constituency are guaranteed a job or a place in education or training so that their future is bright and full of hope. As a young woman, I intend fully to be a credible voice and an active voice for those young people who are seeking work or to further their own education. But when I look back at what this government have achieved, and when we look at this time last year, we successfully renegotiated the promissory note deal when others thought it wasn't possible. Since then, we've also shut down Anglo-Irish Bank, the toxic bank, and exited the bailout and waved goodbye to the Troika. And as you all know, we're still working on getting rid of Ireland's legacy banking debt issue so it does not continue to threaten any economic recovery, which is underway, it must be said. And there's no doubt that Taoiseach and our other senior ministers have been campaigning very hard in Europe on the legacy bank debt issue. MEPs from the Parliament's Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, who are examining the workings of the Troika, were recently in Dublin, and I know that they met with a number of our ministers, among them Minister Brendan Howlin. But if I get to Europe, friends, I want to get on that committee to bolster this campaign and to make Ireland's legacy bank issue the most high-profile issue in the European Parliament. This work is about making allies. It's about building relationships with the key people and institutions like Mario Draghi and the ECB. And I think one of my very first steps that I will take if I'm elected will be to host a conference in the Parliament to make sure that every and each one of the MEPs serving there and every political grouping there knows all about our historic bank debt problem, and that Labour MEPs mean business in a deal to reduce the toxic bank debt which has been left to us by the Fianna Fáil government, the last government before we took up office. But finally, just in relation to the question of whether I can win this election or not, I believe the answer is simple. I believe I can. The perception that this constituency is not a Labour heartland no longer applies. This is a new constituency, and therefore it's a new ballgame. The Labour Party achieved and received over 115,000 votes in this combined area in the last general election. And my pledge to all of you in this room is that I will go out there and fight for each and every one of those votes over the course of this election campaign. And today, what I am asking you to do is just to support me in my efforts to deliver the first Labour MEP from the West. Friends, Ireland needs change in Europe. There's no question of that. We need fresh thinking. We need young, driven, dedicated and enthusiastic people fighting on behalf of this great nation in Brussels and in Strasbourg. And I want to be a new voice for Ireland in Europe. Just as I did in 2009 when I ran in the local elections, I feel it's time for my generation to stand up, but to offer new solutions as well in Europe. And I feel by working together for our towns and rural communities in Europe that we can deliver the real recovery for Ireland. But I want to be that new voice for you in Europe. And I believe the campaign starts here and now. Thank you.